So the making of dyneema stays is a bit more complicated than I thought, so I've split it into parts. This part one, supplies and measuring. This is what I guess would call the template, stay template. Now it's made out of how thick is that? It's made out of about 5mm cord, just normal cord. Fairly thick though, so it won't stretch under hand tension. And basically the clevis pin up the mast where everything, you know, like the caps or the backstay, or you know, where the actual pin is, I mark. I've done this one with 2 tapes, so in between the 2 tapes there is that, and this is where, you know, it's the measure twice, mark once. I've actually measured more, like 3 or 4 times with this cord, feeding it along the original metal stays until I got different measurements of the stays, and I've marked them all on the on this master rope. So got bits of tape on it like this all the way through with different measurements, and I always leave a bit of, like whenever I'm measuring, always leave a bit of end. I don't start right at the end before I start, because you know this can get damaged or whatever. Same with measuring on a ruler. And you know, this, I've already done most of the stays I'm working on today, but I'll sort of show how it's done from what I'm working with. So first of all, I need to, you know, if this was the stay, you're going to have basically a loop right at that point, actually right at that point, and then there's going to be a splice in the rope. So you have to measure this splice before you get to that point. You get the measurements for that, for the splicing app, and you know, I've just got it written down here. But you've got basically, you've got a taper length, and then the actual buried length, and then the point where the loop is. So I've got to put this extra onto the rope before I get to that point and start measuring that point. Here's one I prepared earlier. So here's the first taper. I get a bit of tape, I mark it with a texter, and get a bit of tape, and just so I know what it is, write down what it is. I then come up to the actual splice point, and this says CP is in clevis pin. So that splice to that clevis pin is the distance around one of these, and I've measured that and worked out it was 80 piece of rope before. So I've just added 80 in there, and now I'm starting, once I've got the loop and all the rope that's going to go back into the splice, you know, with the taper and everything, that's where I start from. I then get these together, I line it up on the actual mark, because there's a tape and a mark. I line this up on that mark, and then I start with tension, hand tension, going down both ropes. Sorry, but take two, that audio is horrible. So you line up the clevis pin, top end, after you've measured the splicing point and the taper point and the actual eyelet itself, and then you start clamping and feeding both ropes from thumb to thumb, making sure that neither rope moves separately to the other. This has to be accurate. So you can see me just going past the spreader point for the caps there, moving on to the stay I actually want. So here I'm coming up to the forward lower, and I cleared the tape back to actually find the proper mark. So texture mark is where it actually is. And I'll just mark the actual stay at that point. Some masking tape. Marking forward lower. Marking with the what it actually is at this point. I leave the mark, the tape out of the actual mark, so I can see the mark. And I'm going to line these up, go back the other way, check that it's, check, I just go back the other way.
Adjust me, 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 adjust me.
That sort of distance over that length is fine. It's actually spot on. There's the mark there. There's the tape there. But even if it was like that or like that over that sort of distance, because it's a lashing rigging and it's going to stretch and there's a lot of stuff that happens with it, I think that's fine to be like this sort of thing. But that is a good enough hit for me to now make a stay out of it. So I go to the other end where I've marked it. And that's the forward lower friction ring. So then I'm going to have the friction ring distance here, which for these ones, when you measure it around and back through, ends up being 150. So I measure on the finer scale ruler. So from the splice, so we have friction ring, 150 to the splice point, and then 600 to the taper. I find marking these out, even if I'm just about to do it straight away, is, doesn't cost much for masking tape, and if I get called away, I can come back to it without losing all what I've done. So the taper point, and the taper point on this one is 400. So this would normally be still attached to the reel, and I measure out the taper, mark at 400 on this one. It's a required taper, and I tape it to the bench. Still be attached to the reel at this point. I tape it to the bench and get ready to make a bit of a nerve-wracking cut. We actually cut the stay out of the dyneema reel. Now, before, I like to look where the fire extinguisher is, where the fire mat is, where the exit is, and then I light up the butane and get on with the cutting. Now, again, that would be on the reel. I also marked a diagonal in there because it just makes it easy with all the splicing and feeding into the rope. So I just cut it off diagonally. Makes it easier to separate separate strands as well. Just waiting for the blade to heat up. And that's the cut, and that short bit would be what was left on the reel for the next day, and that's all sealed. So this master with all the different stay lengths lives on the boat, stays on the boat, so you can make stays when necessary.